Hey, Nismah.
Hey, Jen.
What are you listening to this week? Welcome to Season 3 of What Are You Listening To? The weekly podcast created to foster community through music by sharing the stories behind the songs that soundtrack our lives. Some of the songs are old, some new, all good. I'm Jenn Tully, and this week I'm joined by Nismah Osman. Nismah is a songwriter and music producer. She's written songs for Love is Blind, Temptation Island, and Dancing with the Stars, just to name a few. Her mission is to help aspiring creatives escape the burnout that comes from pursuing overcrowded, traditional promotional strategies that eat away at inspiration and passion. By sharing her combined knowledge of music licensing, songwriting, and business, she hopes to help other talented musicians build satisfying careers instead of burning out and quitting too early. This week, Nismah and I are going to get to know each other through 4 songs that get us every time. 2 are her picks and 2 are mine. For the best listening experience, I recommend tuning into the show on Spotify. There you can hear the show with the songs we discuss incorporated. You can also find the show on Apple, Amazon Music, or wherever you stream. But if you aren't listening on Spotify, be sure to give the playlist a listen and then tune into our conversation. With that, let's get started. Nismah, what are you listening to this week?
Hey, Jen. I'm so excited to be here. I'm always listening to a lot, but today we're going to talk about. I had to pick 2, so let's get into it.
Yes, let's. That's always the hardest part of doing the show, right? Is picking just 2 songs.
It felt impossible, but I decided not to overthink it and just kind of pick 2 that. The logic I used was, I wish I wrote these songs.
Okay, I get it. Yep. So tell me about your first pick. What is it?
Yeah, so we're going to talk about Landslide by the infamous, amazing Fleetwood Mac.
Oh, I mean, it really, it doesn't get any better than Fleetwood Mac for me. I could do, you and I spoke about this before we started recording. Your 2 picks and your artists, actually probably all 4 artists that we're bringing to the show today. I could do a whole episode about, at least, and Fleetwood Mac is one I feel like I could do a whole season about. I feel like all of their music has been so important in my life for various reasons. So it just feels like, this song is such a rich, amazing, beautiful song. Tell me how this song came into your life, when it first became important to you, and why you love it, and what about it makes you wish you wrote it.
Yeah. Oh man. I don't remember the first time I heard it, but every time I listen to it, I feel grateful that it comes on. And I it's kind of weird to say it that way, but I almost feel like it's like all great songs, a window into someone's deep truth and pain in life. And I think that, for the times, when I can't exactly remember the decades that Fleetwood Mac reigned. I think it was the 60s and 70s, but
yeah,
life was different back then, and I think it was more daring to be honest in music, especially when you were a woman and in a band with people that were not your gender, or perhaps you were dating or doing other things with. So it was just, I think when I listen to this song, I feel like I get to access a really a small microcosm of safety to feel the pain of what the song is about, which to me it's about kind of loss and getting your head around loss and figuring out how to move on, and almost being forced to move on from life. So yeah, it's just so many layers.
So many. And I feel like that's some of the magic of Stevie Nicks too,
Yeah.
And like you said, this album was released in 1975. And I always point things like this out because I think a lot of people don't know this was Fleetwood Mac's 10th studio album.
Wow.
But
yeah.
It was the first album with Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks.
Okay.
Right. So yes, I think there's a place for the Peter Green Fleetwood Mac and the early days of Fleetwood Mac. But for me, Fleetwood Mac, and we'll talk later when we get into some of the guitar players that we picked in later songs. Like, yes, you cannot argue with Peter Green. I'm definitely not dissing him. I'm just saying, for me, Fleetwood Mac really begins with this album. Like, Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks are what make the magic that is Fleetwood Mac for me. And so I love this album for that reason. This is sort of what introduced the world. And then, you had Stevie Nicks so tied to Lindsey Buckingham in so many ways, even like their first iteration was a band called Buckingham Nicks that didn't go very far. Everybody knows the story, that they got sucked into Fleetwood Mac, and the rest is history. Well, I guess the rest is history. And then the Rumors album, right?
Yeah, right.
But I just feel like this particular album, this particular song this was like an introduction to like, I'm Stevie Nicks. Like, yes, Lindsey Buckingham is a part of my history. He's a part of who I am, but look at what I can do. Like, so it feels like, even though it's so sad, it still to me is that song about breaking away and being your own person, and how scary that realization is. I think that the song has always reminded me of my dad, and probably that has a lot to do with that live version. I think it came out from maybe an episode of Storytellers where she says, this one's for you, Daddy, before she sings it. But I think so many of those themes, like time makes you bolder, even children get older. It's like, it is scary to break away from your partner or your parents or a sibling or your family, like just anybody, where you start to think like, I think I see things a little bit differently than this person. And I don't know if that's going to help us grow in the right direction or if that's going to force us to grow apart. Right. And that's always been such a unique thing about this song to me, like the imagery of that feeling being represented by a landslide, or the lyric of time makes you bolder, even children get older. Like, all of those things to me are like that sort of breaking away when you realize that not everything that you grew up with or everything that the people you love think is exactly what you think too, and that's okay. It's scary, but it's okay.
Well, and you mentioned the imagery of the landslide, and I think it's a really powerful way that they choose to describe how it feels to go through that process of loss in life.
Yeah.
Because it feels like everything is tumbling down around you, and really the essence of that is that you don't really have any control, almost, it feels like. And that's really what a landslide is, right? It's just you kind of have to let it happen and hope for the best. And I think it's so powerful, because one of the things I love about the process of songwriting, and something that I learned way back when I went to like a songwriting retreat in Nashville years ago, was that really songwriting isn't about saying something new. It's about saying things that have already been said, but in a new way. And I think using those really strong, powerful concepts like a landslide, it's such a beautiful and powerful way to drive home the point. And I think it's so cleverly and uniquely done that it's not so in your face, but it's also obvious. And that's what I think she captures that really, really well in that concept and that imagery of a landslide.
Yeah, I completely agree. And the feeling that this song is going to hit differently at different points in your life, right?
Yeah.
That's what I love too about, like you're saying, like the landslide imagery. It's something that everybody knows. It seems simple, but there are so many layers depending on what vantage point you're taking with this song. Yep. So I agree, just completely, almost a perfect song in my opinion. Like this is a favorite. I love many, many Fleetwood Mac songs, but this one it will always be a standout and one close to my heart. But
and sorry.
No, go ahead.
Say, not to mention the fact that it's so simple. It's basically underscored by a simple repeating guitar part. There's no fancy production, there's no gimmicks, and that speaks to the strength of the song, in my opinion. I'm a big believer that production cannot save a poorly written song, and that a good song should be able to stand on its own. And I think that that's perfectly demonstrated in this track.
Agreed. I totally agree. And I also think that your second pick is a pretty solid example of some of
Yes,
that as well. So tell me what your
absolutely.
second song was.
So that's You're Gonna Live Forever in Me by the legendary, oft-hated John Mayer.
Yeah, we talked about, I'm glad you said that because we talked about this before we went recording. And it's like, I'm really interested to get into this with you, especially knowing that I know that you're a graduate of Berkeley. And I think John Mayer only attended for maybe a couple semesters.
Yeah.
But I'm really like, I love John Mayer and could, again, do probably more than an episode. I probably do a whole season on John
Oh,
Mayer
yeah.
too, I would say. And he's one of those artists though that I kind of like whisper that I like, you know, like I'm never like out and like real loud about my John Mayer. I remember when the Sob Rock album came out, this most recent album, and I loved all of like the 80s imagery that he was using for the album. And I was like super tempted after I saw him live last time to get a shirt. And then I'm like, but then I can only wear it at home because then people will know I liked him. And I'm like, wait a minute, like why is this? I'm curious, is like, again, because I know you went to a very prestigious music school. He attended there for a bit. Like, why do you think that is? Like, we'll get into this song, we'll get into his music and why you and I both think he's genius. But why do you think widely he is one of those artists that you have to kind of like, ooh, like I like him? Is it because he's like super foxy and so like the dudes discredit him because the ladies are like, John Mayer, or like I don't know, I can't get my head around why. And he's such a badass guitarist. And if you listen to John Mayer Trio, like he can play jazz, he's doing all the Dead and Company stuff. I'm like, why isn't he like the male Taylor Swift, right? Like
Yeah, I know. I mean, I've thought about this too, and I think I agree with you. I sometimes feel like when I say that I like John Mayer, I kind of have to like wince a little bit, just, but I really do think that it's because, and to his complete fault, he is kind of openly a jackass and he's kind of a womanizer. And I think that it's just people don't like that, but he's undeniably incredible at everything he does, that I think people hate him even more because it almost is like, well, you can't be both. You can't be amazing and an awful, person. And I'm not saying he's an awful person. I don't know the guy, but just from what I've heard and seen, there's enough evidence out there that, to speak to him being not the most personable, human being on the planet. But coupled with the fact that he's also incredible, I think that it just makes him more hateable by the wrong people. So, but yeah, I mean, I think he's a lyrical and musical and guitar genius. I really do.
I agree. And this album is one of my favorites. This is off of the album The Search for Everything from 2017, also known as the Katy Perry breakup album, right? But like Emoji of a Wave, Love on the Weekend, like these are both songs that I love, love, love. And I think lyrically, this particular song, though, is so strong. Like from the opening line, it hooks you in. Like this is when you talk about lyrics you wish you'd written. I'm like, a great big bang and dinosaurs, fiery raining meteors. It all ends, unfortunately. And you're just like, oh, man. Like, and it's like you said, like we all know about Big Bang Theory and the dinosaurs and the meteors, but the way just turning a phrase like that, I say this a lot, like it's magic. It's what gets me so hyped up about music. It's why I could talk to someone like you for days about even just that opening line and how brilliant you have to be that succinct and that like it's not a sophisticated rhyming scheme, but it's different. Like I've never rhymed like, I just think that dinosaur and meteor, it's just, I just think it's so, again, speaks to kind of the genius of the way he's able to take those really common experiences and spin them out in a way that makes you feel like, yes, that's how I've been trying to think about the situation. He did it. He said it for me.
And one of the things that I love about this song that I think makes it really special is it almost feels like, both in the production, in the chords and the harmony he chooses, and in the lyrics, it almost feels like a little bit of a movie soundtrack. It reminds me of that the music from Up, actually, that
Yeah.
like really sweet somber piano. And
Yeah.
I would not ever dare say that that was unintentional, because in the song he is really describing kind of like the scene playing out. It's kind of like that montage scene that you
Mm-hmm.
would think of when you listen to the lyrics or watch a movie of a couple kind of breaking up or going through the memories of their time together. And I think that it only adds to the power of what he's trying to say. And again, just like in Landslide, it's super simple. It's just a
Yeah.
piano, and I can't remember if there's maybe some light strings, but it's really simple, and the story really speaks for itself. And just the concept of someone living forever in you is, I think, we don't talk about that enough, especially in our sort of cancel culture,
Yep.
where we're expected to kind of pretend like entire relationships or people never happened and move on with life, when really people do impact us. They do change us forever, and acknowledging that and learning to expand with that rather than trying to pretend it doesn't exist is really freeing and really healing. And I just love that he dares to kind of even claim that so boldly.
You're like speaking my language right now. Like, this is so like, again, this is like what like makes me wake up in the morning and like live for music, right?
Yeah.
Conversations like this, because you're right. You cannot, like, any relationship you've ever had, good or bad, is
Mm-hmm.
with you forever. It just is.
Yeah.
Whether you want to acknowledge it or not, whether it was a happy memory or a sad one, they're all there. And I'm
Yep.
so with you. Like, the sooner we learn to kind of hug all of those relationships instead of like, be afraid of them or ashamed of them or whatever,
Yeah.
that's when like the real growth and the real magic seems to happen, that lead you to better circumstances, I
Yeah.
think. And I think one of the lines in the song that encompasses that so beautifully for me, and this is, I think about this line all the time. I will sometimes fall asleep thinking about it, because it's one of those that's like embedded in my brain forever. And it's the line where he says, life is full of sweet mistakes,
Yeah.
and love's an honest one to make. Like,
yeah.
oh, it makes me almost
It's
cry
so,
just
I know.
reading it. Like,
I'm
it's
with
just
you.
like, it really is true. Like,
Yeah.
sometimes the things that hurt us the most are the things that give us the biggest gifts in the
Yeah.
end,
Yeah. It's
So
really
this one,
moving.
we warned people up front that this was the episode about songs that get us every time. So if
Yep.
I'm bawling again, that's why.
Let it out. That's what it's for. It's what music's for.
Yeah, just the processing. And again, I think that, there are so many of his songs that I could go down that path with, whether it's Slow Dancing in a Burning Room,
Yeah.
or another favorite, a song that I think is so underrated and so genius is Walt Grace's Submarine Test, January 1967. I think that's a genius song that nobody knows.
Yeah, I haven't even heard of that. I'm going to listen to it as soon as we
Go
hop
look
off.
for it. Go look
Yeah.
for it. It is, I think it's on the Born and Raised album, which not a favorite of mine. But that song, like, just, listen to it, and then we'll have a whole other conversation
Yeah.
just about that song. It's so deep. It has a cliffhanger ending, if you will. Like, it's just beautiful.
Okay. Definitely gonna.
I think New Light is great. His version of Free Falling, I rarely love a cover more than the original, but that's one, like, every time that conversation comes up, I'm like, well, the only time I could say that it's like a neck and neck race for me is John Mayer's version of Free Falling. I think is
captures
just
the
so
essence
great
of it better than I think the original.
Yeah, so good.
Yeah.
So good. Well, as we transition out of our love for John Mayer, I'm going to lead us into my first pick, which was another band, a song by another band that I love that doesn't pop up on the show as often as I would expect, given how much airtime these guys have had in my ears. But my first pick is a song called "Wiser Time" by the Black Crowes. So this is a song that, if you're not familiar with this album, it's off the Amorica album from 1994. Like, go listen to this album right away if you've not heard it, listeners. Like, it's one of my favorites.
Yeah.
It's such a good, like solid album from beginning to end. And I discovered the Black Crowes when I was in high school. That's when the full length Shake Your Money Maker album came out, and it had Hard to Handle, which was kind of their big first hit on it. And then they had an album in the middle called Southern Harmony and Musical Companion, which was good. But then Amorica came out in '94, and by that time I was in college. And I mean, this album just kind of soundtracked that time period for me.
Yeah.
And so I loved it. And then I kind of put it away, like you do with an album. You listen, it delivers kind of what you need, and then you move on and life happens. And then this song and this album found me again when my mom was sick, near the end of her life. She was in a rehab hospital up in Dallas. I live in Austin, Texas. So I was making that drive back and forth to Austin and Dallas a lot. And this song just came and saved me like more times than I care to admit, like just on that drive, taking these lyrics in and hearing them differently. Like they sounded a whole lot different when I was, partying in college than when I was making this drive back and forth, knowing that, my days were probably numbered with my mom. Like it just really, like, it changed the song for me. And I think that speaks to like the brilliance of a song too, that I say this a lot on the show, like songs that can hold that much. Like as a creator, I have to ask you, like, I think that must be such a huge responsibility, but such an amazing feeling of pride when you create a song that can hold all of these feelings for someone. It can be a song that's playing in the background when you're at a party, in college, and it can be a song that gets you through, one of the major life stages of losing a parent. Like, I mean, I just feel like that's got to feel like such an amazing accomplishment. Tell me what you think about that. If you're familiar with this song, like jump in here.
So I'll answer your questions in reverse. So I had never heard the song before you shared it with me. Okay. And to be honest, I haven't listened to the Black Crowes that much. And I want to ask you more about your experience with this song, but I'll answer your first question now. So yes, it's a huge responsibility, but other than that, or beyond that, it's a huge gift and a privilege. And it's, I think, what makes the difference between songs that are just kind of songs and then songs that have a lasting impact. And I think what it is a songwriter's willingness to be truly honest. And that requires an honesty with themselves, because I think these days songwriting is a lot of it is so systematic, and so, especially in the pop world, and, even in the rock and hip hop world, everything is so, you're writing songs in like 30 minutes and with 12 people, and you're just getting the best, most clever lines. And that's great. And there's value in that. And I write like that sometimes, and I'm not judging that process, but I think the natural consequence of that is that those songs have a very short shelf life because they don't resonate with the deep human experience. Like, unlike songs like this one and the others that we've discussed, which come from a true place of the writer's deepest vulnerability. Because I think those lessons are really, not to get woo-woo, but they're really energetic, and the words are just kind of details. And that's why I think you can experience them differently as you go through life, because the energy is the same, and then the words resonate differently based on the context you're in. So yes, to answer your question, yes, and then I went off on a tangent, but
I love it though.
It's the best part of writing songs, because you can really tap into that human experience.
Yeah, and this one too, I think I love the guitar. I love the lyrics. I love the arrangement of this song. And, just like the last song sort of choked me up, this one, like, I love the sort of the line that that the title of the song is pulled from, where he says 14 seconds till sunrise, tired but wiser for the time. I love that. But then that build up to the chorus of the song, like that's the part that gets me every freaking time, you know, and then you build to this beautiful crescendo of on a good day, it's not every day we can part the sea. And on a bad day, I know it ain't every day, glory beyond our reach. I'm just like, ooh, like knocking me over with some really like hard hitting lyrics again that just like stop me in my tracks every time. And again, this is a song that I've heard at least 100 times. And the fact that I still like tear up, it seems like magic to me. Like that's why I'm so enamored with, you know, singer-songwriters, especially. Like it just feels like you have some sort of like magic in your pocket if you can pull out something that moves people this way. And I just am so grateful that people have that gift, you know, that people have that talent and they're willing to be vulnerable and share it, because it's made a huge difference in my life. There's no other way to say it. It has. Well, and then, you know, this was an interesting thought too, that we'll hop here before we pop onto the last track. But this is something that was interesting to me that I noticed, and I'm curious to get your take. So surprisingly or not, both of my picks this week have kind of an undeniable like country or Southern rock feel. And I'm curious because like they're so personal to me, and I'm trying to articulate this in a way that makes sense. But you know how people that are bilingual or people that speak two languages, like often when they're speaking about something that's very personal or they're talking about money, they'll do it in their native tongue, right? Like they'll speak in, I live in Texas, you know, there are a lot of bilingual folks that speak English and Spanish, and, you know, they'll be speaking English and then you talk about money and they're switching to Spanish, right? Like, because that's first language. And so I feel like maybe that's why these songs like are so like sound so Southern, because that's where I'm from. And these are like my first language, right? Like it's like I feel like the principle's the same. Like these songs, it makes sense that they sound like where I'm from because they speak to me at such a like a base level. So I don't know. I just like that point just came across as I was listening, and I was thinking like, that's interesting. I wonder if these two things kind of like operate on the same plane, you know?
Definitely.
Because I don't typically like, you know, pop on, like you know, anybody that listens to the show knows that if I'm talking about country music, I'm talking about like old. I have zero need for like a lot of the new country music that's out. It just, it sounds kind of like crappy pop to me a lot of times.
It is pop with guitar twang in the background.
Right. So like, it's not like I'm like steeped in that. But it was just funny to me when I resonate, or when I looked back on these two picks, I was like, like these two are definitely like look like a person from Texas picked them, you know, which is funny because that's just not been, it wasn't something that I consciously thought about. But again, just being so personal, I think that they reflect where you personally come from. But anyway.
Absolutely. I love that.
Well, my second pick, and to round out and finish out our playlist today, is a song that I love from 2018, a song called Space Cowboy by Kacey Musgraves. Now, Kacey Musgraves is another one that like I've listened to her other albums and I think she's great, but really this is the only one. Like if people are talking to me about Kacey Musgraves, I really have to kind of piece out other than this Golden Hour album. And this Golden Hour album for me is a no skip album. I'll listen to every song in order, over and over again. I just think that it's so, again, well written. I think her voice is so beautiful. I think she does a great job at, like we've been, saying, articulating those feelings that are so universal, but sometimes so hard to put into words. And this song really captures a lot of that for me. Were you familiar with this one? Had you heard this song?
Yes, and I love this entire album, and I don't consider myself primarily a country music fan. But this album really, I had to kind of tip my hat because, and I had heard that she got a lot of flack from the country community, basically people saying, this isn't country, what are you doing? And I was like, you go girl, you write your story and you write honest songs. And I think why this album is so powerful is because she dared to kind of get more honest, because I think a lot of modern country is very what's the term, they use a lot of um gimmicks in the writing, and it
Yeah.
takes away from the depth, because they're trying to get charts, right? They're trying to get charted, and nobody's to blame. But I think she kind of was like, you know what, I went through a divorce and I want to write about it really honestly, and I think it really came through in that.
Yeah, I think that she's, and I think too, I'm such a child of like pop culture, like I
Mm-hmm.
grew up like music and movies and all of that was so prominent in my house. My parents are both big music fans. And so I've always grown up listening to it. And those early songs, especially, were kind of how I envisioned myself, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they taught me how to be in a relationship. They taught me how to be a friend and a daughter and, the kind of person that I wanted to present as when I walked into a room. And so I think that this one is just, it's so personal and resonates for the reason you just said. Like she sort of dared to be vulnerable and
Mm-hmm.
take this position of like, yes, I really love this person. And yes, I'm super dupes into them. But if it's a one-sided relationship, there's never going to be partnership there,
Yep.
right? And it's one of those lessons. It's something I try and teach my daughter, like
Yeah.
if you can. And I think, again, and back to a lot of like traditional country, there's a lot of messages encouraging you to stand by your man and to stay
Yeah.
true and faithful, no matter how
Yeah.
like a drunken loser they are, and
Totally.
this one sort of takes it back and says, no, you can love this person, but you can also know that it's time to move on because they're just not ever going to meet you where you need them to meet you.
Yeah.
And this one, it was funny because the song came out in 2018 and it immediately summed up a relationship that I'd had when I lived in Los Angeles, a really early relationship when I had first moved out to California. And it always struck me that, more than 20 years after that breakup, this
Mm.
song like finally arrived that summed that up for me.
Yeah.
And I always think it's funny too, because when I first got to California and people knew that I was from Texas, everybody was always like, well, where's your hat? Where's your belt? Where's
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm from Dallas. It's like the seventh biggest city in the country. Like
Yeah.
you know what I mean? It was
Yeah.
always funny to me that people expected me to have a big accent or to be
Yeah.
wearing a hat and boots. And so I love that she plays with like the cowboy thing
Yeah.
here and the boots and the horse, and so that just like, again, this was one of those that kind of came out of the blue and summed up that relationship that lives in me forever, that kind of was just waiting for a song to kind of own it and let me put it away. And this song delivered that for me. It
Yeah.
allowed me to kind of process that relationship in a way that made me feel proud for walking away rather than feeling like I was broken up with and I
Yeah.
got left behind.
Yeah.
It made me grateful that I realized that this relationship was never going to meet me where I needed it to. And as sad as it was to let that person go, I had to.
Yeah, totally. Not to mention what I think is an intentional play on words, and I think you had mentioned this before we hopped on, that space cowboy, because the way
Mhm.
that she phrases it, right? It's so you can have your space comma cowboy, but the
Yeah.
title, there's no space, right?
Yep.
Space cowboy. And to me that says like, you're off in space, cowboy. You're a space cowboy.
Yep.
You're not here on Earth where I need you. And I just think it's kind of really genius the way that she summed that all up.
Yeah, I agree. And again, listeners, if you've not taken the time to go through the Golden Hour album, listen from beginning to end. It was a real toss up for me, honestly, with this song and Love is a Wild Thing. That's another song that I think is just genius off of that album. But Space Cowboy, just that one always kind of like takes the cake for me.
Yeah.
But Love is a Wild Thing is a really close second in terms of favorites on this album. And I love too that this, we were able to focus some of my favorite ladies in rock,
Yeah.
like when I think about like sitting around a record player and listening to albums, like I can't think of anybody I'd rather do it with than like Kacey Musgraves
Yeah.
and Stevie Nicks and Christine McVie and you and me.
Yeah.
Like R.I.P. Christine McVie. I wish that
Yeah.
we could sit around a record player with her, but like that, the five of us, can you imagine? That would be like a rock and roll dream come true, like to be
amazing.
able to listen to albums with that crew.
Yeah. my God, sign me
Oh,
up.
so good. Well, oh my gosh, I can't say it enough. I've been thanking you since we first met, but really, Nismah, this is the kind of conversation that I live to have. So I'm so glad you were down. I'm so glad you brought like amazing songs. This has been so fun for me, and
Yeah,
it's been
thank
a
you.
pleasure getting to know you through your songs.
Yeah, likewise, Jen. I was it was an unexpected pleasure, and I like I said, I can talk about music all day, and I'm glad that I've connected with someone who won't get sick of it.
Never, ever, ever. And I'm also too, I'm anxious for listeners to check out some of your original music too,
Sure,
because
yeah.
we made a little off the record deal that
Yep.
when one of your songs that was a particular fave of mine is ready to go out into the world, you'll let us introduce it at least in part on the show. So
Sure.
I'm going to hold you to that.
You got it. You got it. I give you my word.
Excellent. Well, listeners, if you'd like to learn more about Nismah and listen to some of her music, check out her website at nismahosman.com. And that's NISMAHOSMAN.com /call, CALL. And as always, please be sure to follow, download, and share this show. If you love listening, drop us a review on Apple or Spotify. And last but not least, to stay informed on all things Super Awesome Mix and what are you listening to, be sure to follow us on Instagram at Super Awesome Mix. Thanks for listening, and please join me again next week to find your new favorite song.